One of the better bats traded at this year's deadline might just be Ryan O'Hearn. So what could the Orioles get if teams say like the Reds or the Mariners were interested? We'll find out coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, July 10th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at Ryan O'Hearn, one of the Orioles' higher profile potential trade pieces at this year's deadline, as they probably become sellers, and O'Hearn is an all-star starter at DH in the American League. There's going to be a lot of teams interested in O'Hearn's bat, so we're going to talk to some representatives from a couple of those teams, the Reds and the Mariners, to see what would those squads be willing to give up to get Ryan O'Hearn. And that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So the Orioles were supposed to play a baseball game on Wednesday night against the Mets, despite the fact that they took a really disappointing 7-6 loss in extra innings on Tuesday. Well, I am recording this right around 6 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. I am looking out the window. It is not sounding or looking good outside in Baltimore, and the Orioles already at this point have postponed Wednesday night's game. It will be a doubleheader here played on Thursday between the Orioles and the Mets, and although it's not actively raining yet here at 6 p.m. for what was scheduled to be a 7 p.m. start, it does not look good for the rest of the night weather-wise in Baltimore, so probably the good move to cancel it or postpone it early, and the O's are supposed to play a day game Thursday anyway, so easier to get a doubleheader in. So it does look like it'll be a 12 o'clock game one, a split doubleheader, and then a 5 o'clock game two on Thursday. And the plan, at least for now, seems to be Charlie Morton still pitches game one, Tomoyuki Sugano pitches game two. The Mets are still TBD on the starters for those two games at this point, but obviously with the Orioles dropping game one, they could do anything today. They could win the series, they could lose the series, they could get swept. But Friday's episode will now have a recap of both games of the doubleheader on Thursday. That means no game to recap here on a Thursday episode, but we still have plenty to talk about. Wanted to talk about Ryan O'Hearn because the Orioles at 40-50 here as we sit here on July 10th seem like very likely sellers at the deadline. And this is something we've talked about, right? They're not going to go into full rebuild mode again. It's going to be a retool to get themselves back to a playoff worthy team, hopefully in 2026. But they have a lot of rental pieces. A rental piece is a guy who is an upcoming free agent, is going to hit free agency after the end of the season. And one of them is Ryan O'Hearn, who's having an incredible year. He's going to be the starting DH in the All-Star game for the American League. He's slashing 286, 378, 462 with a 137 WRC plus, 12% walk rate, 17% strikeout rate. He's got 11 home runs. He continues to hit the ball hard. His swing decisions are getting even better as his walk rate continues to increase with a pretty low strikeout rate. And he's probably one of the best, if not the best, left-handed bats that is going to be on the trade market. Now, there's still some argument whether or not the Orioles should actually trade Ryan O'Hearn at this deadline. I don't think at this point they've 100% decided that no matter what, we're going to deal him. Like, if they want to extend him, if they don't think they get a good enough deal, they still could hold on to him. It's not a given that he will be dealt by that July 31st deadline, but it seems fairly likely at this point because teams are going to want a left-handed bat. Now, there are two things working against, well, really three things working against Ryan O'Hearn's trade value. One is that he's a rental. You trade him on July 31st, a team basically gets 2 months and then the postseason of Ryan O'Hearn, and then he becomes a free agent. You're not getting a lot of a player. Number two is he has defensive liabilities, limitations out there. I mean, he's gotten better and better defensively at first base. That is good. You can obviously DH him, and he can play a corner outfield position, right or left field, if you need him to. And a new team will probably play him out there a little bit, but I wouldn't start Ryan O'Hearn in the outfield in a postseason game. So you're kind of backed into a corner there. And then number three is just, he's gotten better hitting against lefties, but he still is obviously much better against righties, still has his struggles against left-handers. And I I don't know if a team would be willing to play him every day. Like this year, a 150 WRC plus against righties, that's great. A 78 WRC plus against lefties. That's not completely unplayable like he's been at times in the past, but it's not great. And if O'Hearn continues to struggle a little bit, which he has lately, he becomes more of a full platoon player, which he had been for the Orioles kind of the past 2 years before moving into more of an everyday role this season. I mean, he's hitting just 202 with a 76 WRC plus since June 1st. He had an incredible first 2 months, and then he slumped some as well. So his value does go down a little bit, but teams are still going to want him, and the Orioles are still going to be looking to at least taking calls and potentially trading him. So I wanted to take a look at what is Ryan O'Hearn worth? Because there are a good amount of corner bats available at the deadline, rental guys every year, but O'Hearn has been good enough where he probably sits a step above those guys. Next week sometime, I'll probably have an episode looking at all the Orioles trade pieces and where they rank among the other potential trade chips at their position to see like how good of cards are the Orioles actually holding at this year's deadline. But O'Hearn's got to be up there amongst those corner bats. And there's teams that are trying to go to the playoffs that have some struggling offenses that are going to want him. And two of the teams that I really identified are the Seattle Mariners and the Cincinnati Reds. These are two teams that are not just kind of struggling offensively in general, but also have some holes at first base. If you look at the Fangraphs projections for first base WAR for the remainder of the season, I mean, these two teams aren't horrendous, but the Reds are 21st and the Mariners are 18th. And first base should be a position where you can pretty easily upgrade. Now, the Mariners' number one first baseman is Luke Raley, who just came back from the injured list. They can move him to the outfield and play O'Hearn there or DH him. You know, same thing with the Reds. They have Spencer Steer there, but he's had his struggles. He can also play the outfield, so you can move things around. And if you swing it over to the DH projections, which is somewhere where O'Hearn could end up, it's even worse. The Reds are 25th and the Mariners 22nd for the remainder of the season. So two teams, I mean, the Mariners had Rowdy Tellez playing first base. They DFA'd him. Now it's like a lot of Donovan Solano. These teams are in the playoff hunt and are looking for some bats and have some prospects and some players that the Orioles could want. So I'm going to bring on two experts on these teams. First, it will be Jeff Carr. He is the host of Locked On Reds here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I believe I've at least done some crossovers with him on this podcast before. We will talk about a couple of different deals that the Orioles and Reds could come together on. And then after that, following Jeff, I will have a Mariners expert on. And that Mariners expert is Christopher Crawford. He does a lot of stuff covering the Mariners and Seattle sports, but specifically to us, he is one of the hosts of the Locked On Mariners Postcasts over on the Locked On Mariners YouTube channel, so part of the Locked On family as well. And we'll talk about a couple of potential deals between Baltimore and Seattle involving Ryan O'Hearn. So the rest of the episode is going to be the chat with Jeff about the Reds and then the chat with Christopher about the Mariners. You're going to hear multiple different deals. I want you to let me know in the comments. Again, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Let me know in the YouTube comments which of the kind of 3 or 4 deals total we'll hear about would you think would be the best for the Orioles to take? We'll declare that the winner and maybe the best team for the O's to trade with Ryan O'Hearn. So when we come back, Jeff Carr of Locked On Reds and then Christopher Crawford of Locked On Mariners. We'll talk about what is Ryan O'Hearn worth and what could the Reds or the Mariners be willing to give up to get him. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. And Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app, they actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. In Game Time, they've got these last minute tickets and zone deals for big savings, like 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA World Cup matchups next year. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Connor Newcomb here from Locked On Orioles, Jeff Carr from Locked On Reds. Jeff, let's talk Ryan O'Hearn trade. I mean, first of all, the question we have to answer before we do any of this is, are the Reds interested in a player like Ryan O'Hearn?
I do think they are looking to up the profile of their lineup. Right now, their lineup is fine, right? It's okay. It's not bad. It's not horrible, but it's also not the kind of thing that if the pitching isn't great, then they can't overcome that. So they definitely want to improve their lineup. And I mean, everything that Ryan O'Hearn has done this season has been pretty impressive. I mean, I love the 143 OPS plus, and everything kind of feeding into that looks really solid on his side. The interesting thing will be what the cost is, because I remember seeing that Jim Bowden trade proposal, and I'm not interested in that.
That's a good question. What was the Jim Bowden? Was he sending a lot over to the Orioles for Ryan O'Hearn?
It was sending a lot. He was sending Chase Petty. He was sending Sammy Stafura, and he was sending Adam Cervanowski, which Adam Cervanowski is a guy that he's a mid-level prospect for the Reds, but he has really risen through the ranks these last few years. Pretty solid left-handed guy. And then Stafura is a young player that they picked in last year's draft that's really kind of profiling well, and he's still a few years away, but ultimately I felt like that was a really tough package to lose for Ryan O'Hearn. But I can understand. I mean, this is going to be a seller's deadline for sure, so it's going to be one of those that you're going to have to make a bid that you probably don't love.
I'm going to be honest with you. When you said Chase Petty, I'm fine if you just stop there. If you want to just stop there and make that deal, like, let's done and dusted, let's get it done. I think, I've talked about this on Locked On Orioles as well a few times. It's really interesting to try and figure out what a player like O'Hearn's value actually is, because he is a rental, right? So you're just getting him for 2 months. He is a left-handed hitter who has hit lefties a lot better this year than he had in the past, but a lot better means he just didn't hit them at all before, and now you can at least play him lower in the lineup against a lefty starter and feel okay that he'll hold his own. He's still going to mash righties and hold his own in there against a left-hander. He's not going to dominate left-handers. And also positionally, he's made 25 starts in the outfield this year. He can do it. If you're putting Ryan O'Hearn in right field in a playoff game, I do feel bad for you. If you're going to do it in a regular season game, it's probably okay. So he's mostly confined to first base and DH, which takes away some flexibility. And it's a little bit of like, yeah, he's done this for 3 years for the Orioles, but there was a lot of time before that when Ryan O'Hearn was a bench player who was DFA'd by the Kansas City Royals, who have no hitters at the moment. So I can't really figure out what his value would be. I think Orioles fans' best case scenario is they kind of send him on loan somewhere and then re-sign him in the offseason because he's been so important to their offense. But from the Orioles end, I'm like, if the O's can get one pitching prospect, and I know Petty's debuted, but he's still technically a prospect, then get one pitching prospect who has the chance to be a somewhat impact major league pitcher, even if it's just as a really good reliever or a solid starter, I would take that. Maybe I'm undervaluing O'Hearn just because he could be a platoon player and he can't really play the field besides first base, but that Bowden trade seems like a wild overpay. It is just Chase Petty an overpay? Because to me, that feels like that might be an overpay itself if they just went the 1-for-1.
I feel like that would be tough. I don't know that it's a non-starter though. And I think that there's a couple of different things with Chase Petty. There's a lot of folks that saw his couple of outings in the major leagues this year and think that they know something about him. Number one, that's not the case. You're not going to learn anything about a guy in a couple of starts. Plus, he had one appearance in the 11th inning of a extra inning ball game where it was just like, this dude's been coming up through the minor leagues as a starter, and now we're putting him in at the end of an extra innings game, and he's struggled up to this point. Like, it feels like we're doing this kid no favors right now. And he's still just 22 years old. So he is still, for all intents and purposes, a blank canvas. I think that he's got the potential of being like a mid-rotation guy. I'd be interested if it were a 1-for-1. The Reds made a trade to get him a few years back where they sent Sonny Gray to the Minnesota Twins, and all they got back was Chase Petty. And at the time, we were like, man, that doesn't seem like a lot. And now we're looking at this and we're like, Chase Petty could be an important part of this rotation moving forward. So I think that might be a bit of a non-starter. But if you're looking for pitching prospects, the Reds definitely have a good number of those. They have Jose Acuna, who's coming up. He's a little bit further back in the minor leagues than where Chase Petty is, but he is a very good pitching prospect. Definitely not as high up on the list on anybody's like radar there, but he would be an interesting prospect who's profiling more as a starter than a reliever. And there's a couple of other guys. Adam Cervanowski might not get it done by himself, but if it were like a Acuna and Cervanowski type package, I could maybe see that working out. Now it's funny because, you know, we always talk about trades at this point in the season, and there's always going to be somebody that's just like, we got to hold on to that prospect. But the Reds are kind of in a position right now where they can go for this thing now and see what they've got. I'd be intrigued as to who else is available in Baltimore, but Ryan O'Hearn is definitely a guy that would boost the profile of this lineup for sure.
I got to ask you about another guy who I just feel like Chase Petty, honestly, if it were the flip side and I was hosting Locked On Reds, I would feel like Chase Petty is an overpay for Ryan O'Hearn. Just for a rental bat, I feel like Chase Petty is, and again, he's just so young. He's still 22. You know, any pitcher can get injured at any time, obviously, but he could be really, really good. Who interests me more, and this may be more of a starter because he is probably a reliever long term. I think it's probably, I don't think he's even been a true starting pitcher in a long time, even in the minors. Is Luis May is somebody who really intrigues me because he's quote unquote big league ready. I know he's in AAA at the moment, I believe, with Cincinnati, but he's been up for a little bit this year. Great stuff. Sometimes doesn't know where the ball is going, it seems like. But to me, he looks exactly like when the Orioles 3 years ago at the deadline got Yennier Cano for Jorge Lopez. Cano had pitched for the Twins in the big leagues for 6 or 7 innings. The stuff had been awesome, and he had basically walked everybody he faced. And it was just like, okay, he's gotten his taste of the big leagues. There's certainly something here. We just need to fix him a little bit. Luis May seems like a very similar pitcher, and Cano was an all-star a year later as maybe the best setup man in baseball. I could see that, and maybe Orioles fans will be like, you're going to get just a reliever for our best hitter, but you got to understand when he's a rental, you just can't get as much out of these guys when you're paying for 2 months. So maybe like Luis May and a much smaller prospect way down the list, is that a deal that could potentially be made between the Reds and the Orioles?
That would be intriguing because Luis May has electric stuff. His fastball and slider combination is crazy awesome. The only problem is it is clear that there are just some outings he doesn't know where they're going. And that's a bit of a tough sell because he really started out his first handful of appearances when they called him up. It was like, whoa, this guy might be a diamond in the rough. And then he went like 3 or 4 straight appearances of walking multiple guys and giving up some hard contact. And you're like, okay, so he's definitely still got work to do to get to that point. But he would be interesting. I think if you're telling me it would just be a 1-for-1, I'd do it. I'd also be intrigued at this because I've been looking at the Orioles a lot, but not for the lineup, for the bullpen, because the Reds need bullpen help. Any contending team needs bullpen help. And you mentioned a name that I'm very interested in Yennier Cano. I kind of wonder, would Chase Petty, for the two of them, be something that would work?
I think you've got Mike Elias's ear on that one, and you've certainly got mine. Cano's been interesting because he has so much team control. I don't think he's a free agent until after 2029 or maybe 2030. It would be like a better version of that Sam Moll deal that the Reds did. What was that, a year or two ago, where they just went and got a reliever with like 7 years of control to just add to their bullpen? But Cano's been an all-star. Now, he did just spend a week in AAA because he's had a little bit of struggles, and then they just called him back up the other day. But still, overall, he's at worst a great middle reliever, and he could easily get back to that dominant setup man that he was. And I think the Orioles are going to have to package a reliever with these bats at some point to actually get something legitimate. We'll see what the Orioles fans in my comment section say to that one. But maybe Mike Elias wants a little Dominican Summer League prospect sweetener, kind of lottery ticket 17-year-old to throw in there from the Red side of the deal. But other than that, if you're getting Petty, who I think the O's could feel confident in, they could put him in their 2026 starting rotation, I think they do that deal. I honestly do think the Orioles do that deal. I think maybe I would be down for O'Hearn for May straight up, but to add Cano and get Petty, I would be very, very intrigued by doing that deal.
Because that would be like, because there's definitely been some things floated around there. Like, could the Reds find a team and kind of, take care of two birds with one stone type of deal? And this would be that type of a move. I still would look for somebody that can raise their profile against left-handed pitching a little bit more than O'Hearn will. But at the same time, Ryan O'Hearn would be a clear candidate to be in the middle of the lineup against right-handed pitching, if not there in the 4 spot. And then you could kind of see former Oriole Austin Hayes maybe move down to the 5th spot or something like that. He's been, when healthy, he's been the Reds' cleanup hitter so far this season, albeit he hasn't been the healthiest version of himself.
The Austin Hayes experience.
Yeah, so that'd be interesting to see how that would develop. I'd be intrigued on if there could be like a 2-for-1 deal, because I think the Reds can be aggressive here. And I know that there's going to be some folks that are just like, I don't want to lose Chase Petty, but the Reds have so many pitching prospects and they have a bright future on the mound that they can afford to be a little bit of aggressive when it comes to trading one of those guys and maybe get a deal done in what's going to be a tough market to get the deal that you want in this trade deadline.
I think we just made 2 possible deals right there. Try to get 2 players for the Reds, and if it doesn't work out, they can still get Ryan O'Hearn. But I'm feeling good about this. Maybe the 2 of us can just replace Elias and Kroll, and we can kind of go do our jobs and go to the beach.
In my imagination, I think I would like that, but I think in reality, I don't ever want to be a baseball general manager. I see all the heat they get.
It sounds like a bad time. Yeah,
it sounds like
seems like too much stress. Yeah, I'd be fully gray at this point. Very well. Chase Petty for Yennier Cano and Ryan O'Hearn. Sounds good to me.
Let's do it.
So we thank Jeff Carr of Locked On Reds for joining us to talk some mock trades. Next up will be Christopher Crawford, postcast host of Locked On Mariners, to talk some more trades there. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a burst pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait? No, you called the next one. And that's why having a reliable business line is so important. And that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or computer. Your whole team, they can share one number. You don't have to juggle 2 phones just to keep business and personal calls separate. OpenPhone solves that instantly. And with your whole team with one number, you can respond to customers like a shared inbox. No more, hey, who's handling this? And OpenPhone is offering Locked On Orioles listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnMLB. That's OpenPhone.com/LockedOnMLB. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. That's at OpenPhone. No missed calls, no missed customers. We've got Christopher Crawford on the show with us. He is part of this Locked On family, hosts the Locked On Mariners Postcast over at the Locked On Mariners YouTube channel and all of their podcast feeds as well. And we're going to talk about the Mariners potentially wanting Ryan O'Hearn. So Christopher, first of all, thanks for joining the show. And I just did want to ask, first of all, like, you got to set the scene before we jump into it. And that is, what do the Mariners need? They are clearly trying to get back to the postseason this year. What does this team need at this year's deadline?
It's really interesting, and thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute privilege. It's a weird time, and it's something that I've brought up a few times where the Mariners have kind of a golden opportunity is the nice way to put it, and the honest way to put it is that they're just not very good in a lot of places where they can upgrade in a lot of places. Like, you're obviously not going to upgrade at catcher. That's just something that's not going to happen. You're probably not going to upgrade in center field, even though Julio Rodriguez has been kind of so-so with the bat this year, but his defense has been otherworldly. Every other spot, you could kind of make an argument that the Mariners can upgrade or move players to a different position. Like, if you got a great shortstop, you could move J.P. Crawford to second base. If you got a great left fielder, you could make Randy Rosarina more of a part-time designated hitter who maybe plays in the outfield here and there. But honestly, it's just about improving the floor of this offense. There have been some really good moments for this offense, but there have been some moments that have been reminders of why this team didn't make the postseason in 2023 and 2024, because they just did not hit enough. So long story short, the Mariners are looking for a little bit of everything, but the biggest thing to me is just improving the floor of this offense so there are more consistent results with this pitching staff getting healthy finally to make that actually matter.
So I know the Mariners, on Fangraphs right now, their rest of season projections at first base are 18th, which isn't horrendous. I know a lot of that has to do with Luke Raley just getting back.
Right.
Without Luke Raley, it was the Rowdy Tellez DFA, and there was a lot of, I don't even know. I know there was a lot of Donovan Solano over there at one point.
Donnie Barrels,
other guys
for sure.
have played that position. So even with Luke Raley in the fold, I know he's at least trustworthy in the outfield. Like, he can play a corner and they can send him out there. So Ryan O'Hearn does some of the same. I would, having not seen as much Luke Raley, probably call him a better defensive outfielder than Ryan O'Hearn is. But I think O'Hearn, because the Mariners just need bats, I think they would find a way to shoehorn him and his all-star level production into this lineup. Do you think the Mariners, do they need lefties more than righties, or do they have an opening enough at first base or DH and a guy in O'Hearn who can kind of play the corner outfield? Is that a guy who they would be able to put into the fold pretty easily?
I don't think there's any question about it. And the nice thing is that because Luke Raley can play in the outfield, because they have kind of a revolving gate of designated hitters now. Jorge Polanco was that guy, but now is playing some second base. This would be the type of move where you could move a Cole Young back to AAA if they don't feel comfortable, but also, he can play second base. Polanco at some point, hopefully, can start playing third base again, even though it was kind of a disaster when he was there. But that's where I come back to that golden opportunity, which is honestly just darning with faint praise, where it's just, they can find a place for Ryan O'Hearn to play. In terms of the lefty-righty thing, it's kind of nice having left-handed pop for T-Mobile. It's a better park for left-handed hitters than it is right-handers. Not like a massive split difference, but it is easier to hit that right field porch than it is to go out into left field. Part of that, the marine layer effect. Seen lots of articles written about T-Mobile over the last few years, and all of it is true, unfortunately, for better and for worse. But yeah, O'Hearn would be that guy who could slide into first base. You could move Luke Raley into right field. You could also have Luke Raley DH here and there. Dom Canzone has been playing pretty well for Seattle. Maybe we'll mention Dom Canzone's name a little bit later, a little bit of a spoiler alert, but they would find a way for Ryan O'Hearn. He fits in pretty much perfectly with the Seattle Mariner lineup.
And from the Orioles side, as tough it's going to be to trade away O'Hearn, who's been their best hitter this year. He's been so consistent. When the Orioles got him off waivers from the Royals and basically resurrected his career over the last 3 seasons. But he's a 31-year-old DH first base who's on an expiring contract, and the Orioles are in sell mode at the deadline. It's kind of the cookie cutter player that is going to get dealt at the deadline. The questions are going to arise about what is his value, because he doesn't bring a lot of defensively, so he has to hit. He still struggles against lefties some. He's more than a platoon, but it's it can be some struggles against left-handed pitching. On the Orioles side, they're not rebuilding again. They're going to try to win next year. They have too good of a core of talent that is all underperformed this season. So I think they're going to target guys who at the very least can be in the big leagues in 2026 in some of these trades. And I don't think it's surprising to you, Chris, that they probably want pitching. The existence of the Orioles right now, they're probably going to want pitching. It's fine if that's relief arms or starting arms or whatever. If they can get outs in the major leagues next year, the Orioles want them.
Yeah.
So I leave it to you. Knowing that, what do you think Seattle and Trader Jerry himself would be willing to give up in a deal that brings Ryan O'Hearn to the Mariners?
So this is the problem, I think, with the Ryan O'Hearn trade. I don't think it's fit in the roster, because I think the issue here is where Seattle's excellent farm system is the best is in bats, and they're in bats who are not necessarily going to be ready to help in 2026. There are 2025, a lot of potential 2026 guys, 2027 guys. So that would be a little bit of an issue. The other issue is the Mariners do have some intriguing young arms like Logan Evans and Emerson Hancock that would make maybe sense in a trade like this. But because of the injury to Bryce Miller and because of some injury concerns with some other starters, they may be a little more reticent to move an arm like that. This is why a trade for O'Hearn would have made a lot more sense in the offseason, but that would never have come about because you're not trading Ryan O'Hearn. You think you were competing, Captain Hindsight, yada, yada, yada. So the Mariners do have some young arms that I think can make sense in a deal like this. And I think there's some bats who make sense in a deal like this, but it may be not as an ideal of a fit in terms of trading for system flexibility as it would be with some of the other teams. I think that's my one issue with a potential trade here.
Yeah, it could be an issue. And you mentioned the arms like Evans and Hancock. They're kind of, obviously below the level of the big three, big four
Exactly.
young starters that the Mariners have had. And those are the guys that Orioles fans have dreamt on and talked about, could you swing this giant trade where a Jordan Westberg type goes to Seattle and one of those arms comes back? And those are some of those moves that have certainly been talked about, but are much less realistic than something like this happening. So my question to that is, now the Orioles a month ago had a little more plethora of also rental starting pitching arms. Zach Eflin and Tomoyuki Sugano have decided not to get anyone out over the past month, and that is usually an issue.
Right.
If Seattle needs to cover some innings down the stretch without Bryce Miller, and they're worried about giving up a Hancock or an Evans, does throwing in a Charlie Morton to a deal? I know his beginning of the season was terrible, but he's got a 2.2 ERA in the last 2 months.
Right.
And he's a veteran pitcher who's pitched in the postseason and can pitch out of the bullpen. Does that combined with an O'Hearn allow the Mariners to think about, one of these more big league ready type arms that they have?
I think so. Just about the flexibility, because if you take a look at that Seattle Mariner rotation when it's healthy, it is Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Luis Castillo, and Brian Wu. You don't need your fifth starter to be somebody who's in that upper echelon, right? You just want some consistency. And the one thing, I know it was such a bad start, like you mentioned with Uncle Charlie. I know that was bad. You're going to get those 5-inning, 3-run, 6-inning, 3-run starts from Charlie Morton. And if you can get that from your fifth starter, that's great. The issue would be not having one of those guys. And if Gilbert has a setback, if Kirby has a setback, because they both dealt with injuries this year and arm injuries, unfortunately. So you do worry about the potential for those recurring. And Bryce Miller just hasn't been the same this year, currently on the injured list. Long-term future, there's no question that he can be a guy, but you can't really rely on a Bryce Miller. If you add an arm like Morton to that deal, I think it does make it easier for you to include an arm like Evans or Hancock in that type of trade.
Who are the Mariners higher on right now, you think, Evans or Hancock?
Boy, it's a great question because I think the answer changes a lot. Hancock just got optioned to AAA. Apparently, if you give up runs against the Royals, you're not allowed to be a major league player anymore.
It's fair.
Logan Evans has had some brilliant starts, as has Hancock. Logan Evans has had some absolute clunkers, as is Hancock. He just, my buddy Nathan Bishop called it the fire tornado when he gave up the 9 runs against the Chicago Cubs. So we won't include that one, but just beat this couple starts before that. He throws 7 innings of scoreless baseball against the Guardians. I think they probably believe Evans has the higher ceiling because of a 5-pitch mix and a little bit better at missing bats. Whereas I think Hancock might have the higher floor because you kind of know what you're going to get. You're going to get a lot of those 5-inning of 3-run starts, which, that's a 5.40 ERA, but in modern baseball, it's not such a bad thing. It's not such a bad thing to get those 5 innings of 3-run baseball as well. So the long answer to that question is I think they probably value Evans a slight bit more because of a chance that he could be a mid-rotation guy. I think we know now that Hancock is a back-end guy.
Yeah. And so it seems like it's at least a starter to a conversation if Morton's thrown in there to have that conversation.
No doubt.
Now, if the price doesn't match up, right, the Mariners are too worried about giving away one of those depth arms because they're like, we're going to need them to get there. And that's where it's different for the Mariners versus a team like the Dodgers or the Yankees, where they feel, hey, we're going to get there, so we maybe don't need that arm as much. The Mariners are right in the thick of, we got to get there. Is there any arms who have either debuted or maybe are in AAA who are more of relief arms, and maybe this takes Morton out of the conversation, maybe it becomes more of a straight up for Ryan O'Hearn, where it's a relief type arm that is optionable? And I know the Mariners have churned out relievers, but they've also had some more bullpen struggles than usual this season. Are there any of those type of guys who would be kind of separately available for Ryan O'Hearn? Because I think the Orioles are they're looking for arms with stuff who can get outs as early as next year. Are there more of those guys who maybe have more relief risk and aren't, starting options for the Mariners in 2025 that they might be more willing to part with, who are still in the upper minors?
I think there's one guy that you could debate being here, and his name's Brandon Garcia. Now, Garcia was a starter for all of 2024 and he kind of had a breakout campaign, like a 2.25 ERA for Arkansas. But they moved him to the bullpen this year, and the results at first were ugly, like really ugly. But worked his way down to AFC night right here, 3.96 ERA, and just got called up to Tacoma. This guy has really good stuff. A plus fastball, plus cutter, above average slider at times, mixes in a change. Now, he doesn't exactly know where that stuff is going on a great, consistent basis, but the stuff is all there. And because he has some funk to his delivery, he's a guy who's going to be death against lefties. So there's your floor, right? That is that reliever who can come in and can handle right-handers, but can really dominate against lefties, which I think is a pretty valuable thing in any division. But in the American League East, there's some pretty good ones that you'd want to have that ability for. I think Garcia might be right on the precipice on what would be worth O'Hearn and what would not be worth O'Hearn. Like, this would be a real conference call among prospect writers, I think, about whether Brandon Garcia is good enough for Ryan O'Hearn or whether Ryan O'Hearn is good enough for Brandon Garcia. But he is a name that absolutely made sense in terms of what you're describing. That guy who is not going to start for the Seattle Mariners. In fact, if he would be probably in the rotation right now with all of the injuries that they had. They started Luis F. Castillo over the guy, and that's not F in the mean way. That's just what his name is. Brendan Garcia is a guy I think would make an absolute ton of sense in this type of deal, however.
And maybe Elias wants another throw-in lottery ticket kind of younger guy if he is going with a relief prospect for an O'Hearn. Yeah. Maybe another arm that's much lower in the minor leagues as well that you can kind of dream on. Also, Luis F. Castillo traded to the Orioles earlier.
That's right. That's right.
Got injured and was DFA'd by the Orioles. I believe he might have cleared waivers and still be in the organization at the moment. But yes, that was a funny joke the Orioles did earlier this year when they acquired Luis F. Castillo. So I guess we end here. You know, would a O'Hearn and Morton for a Hancock or an Evans be a deal that you could swallow, that Mariners fans could swallow? Is that not enough for giving up one of those guys? Or would you rather do the second option, the Garcia, maybe another, lower arm, just looking through some of these guys in this rotation, these, I don't know, these Michael Morales names or these Marcelo Perez names or something like that, where you can throw in another arm? Would that be more easier to swallow, where you don't get the Morton back and you kind of just get the Ryan O'Hearn deal?
This is a tough one. So my first initial thought, by the way, and I realized that, the Orioles pitching Orioles, the name who makes the most sense in a trade to me in this deal would be Dom Canzone, because Dom Canzone kind of is the Ryan O'Hearn starter kit, only with more upside, because more power. Like, not that Ryan O'Hearn is a dink or dunk hitter by any stretch of the imagination, but Dom Canzone, we're talking about 70 to top of the scales raw power. He can absolutely clobber baseballs. Now, he's probably a guy you can only play against right-handers. He's not a great defensive outfielder, but he's just athletic enough to get it done. And I'd rather see Canzone playing in the outfield than O'Hearn, darning with faint praise a little bit there, to be sure. But I think a trade that involved Dominic Canzone and an arm like Teddy McGraw would make a lot of sense here. Now, Teddy McGraw was a guy who underwent Tommy John surgery when he was at Wake Forest and then dealt with injuries after entering the system for Seattle. But he's a guy with upper echelon stuff and the type of guy that I think Baltimore could develop into a mid-rotation starter or better. But because Seattle has some pitching depth and because of the fact that they have drafted pretty well in these, Urangelo Senjay and Ryan Sloan, their 2 picks last year, both top 100 prospects now, according to a lot of people, you could probably risk making that type of move. So you would get the ceiling of McGraw, and then you would get some ceiling and a pretty decent floor in Canzone. Like, I think it's hard to imagine that he's not going to be at least a solid bench option, like an ultimate weapon against right-handed pitching, who has that chance to be an everyday guy. Now, everyday guy meaning playing against right-handers. He's just never going to hit lefties. I think that would be a pretty intriguing and fair move to give up a 1-year rental, a good one, but getting a guy who's going to be in your organization for sure in 2026, and not just in your organization, on your major league roster probably, and then getting that upside of McGraw, I think would make a lot of sense in this type of deal.
I do like Teddy McGraw. I liked him a lot at Wake Forest. That would be an arm I would be definitely intrigued in. And with Canzone, the Orioles do still have outfielders. They have Dylan Beavers, who's had an incredible season in AAA, who's knocking on the door. But what Canzone gives you, not just kind of a replacement at younger Ryan O'Hearn, he gives you that stability behind Heston Kjerstad, because no one's seen his stock drop more among Orioles young players than Heston Kjerstad this year. He is back in AAA despite O'Hearn about to be traded, despite Tyler O'Neill been out for the whole year, despite Kowser being out for most of the year. Kjerstad's in AAA because that's how bad he was, and it's a similar-ish profile. Kjerstad probably with a higher ceiling still at this point, but you don't know. Kjerstad's 26 and did not look good this year in his first real stint. So, if you get an arm that you can dream on and you can get to, maybe at least with McGraw to AA by the end of this year, and then you can push beyond that in 2026, maybe that's something that Mike Elias would want to do. So, Chris, I don't mind that package, the possible packages, and especially that last one that we have put together. I think Orioles fans probably aren't thinking getting bats back, but you know what? Their offense has also been disappointing this year. It hasn't just been the pitchers that have led them to be 12 games under 500 as we record this here. So, Chris, I really appreciate you coming on. If you could let everybody know kind of where they can find you with your Mariners coverage, if they want to hear more from you.
So I've got a bunch of them, and I apologize already. This will make it a Tolstoy novel of a trade thing. But so I work for NBC Sports / Rotoworld. Please follow my work there. Follow me on Blue Sky at crawfordchrisv.bsky.social. Emerald City Spectrum, if you're looking for local coverage, I'd really appreciate you checking that out. And of course, the Locked On Postcast. Me and my buddy Anders Hurst go on after every single Seattle Mariner game, and we either cry happy tears or we cry the other tears. And it's been about a mixed bag of both of those since we've taken over, but it's been a lot of fun.